Of products that are being put up by scholars, and I'd rather remain that way for the time being. Thank you very much, Professor Chege. And I'd like to start this presentation by thanking the Africa Research and Resource Forum, ARRF, for inviting me to talk to you this afternoon on a subject that is current and so exciting. I am neither a political scientist nor a constitutional lawyer, although I did study some aspects of constitutional law at college, and so I cannot claim expertise in the matter under discussion. But being a hugely interested party, I have at least paid attention to recent developments in Kenya and have formed my own prejudices, which I now would like to share with you. And this is an immense honor for me. Also, allow me at the outset to congratulate the Kenyan people on the momentous occasion of the signing and promulgation of the Constitution of the Republic of Kenya, which is the subject matter of our discussion tonight. Congratulations to the gallant campaigners who can now, in understandable joy, witness the fruition of their efforts. In many ways, the culmination of the constitutional process in Kenya, including the referendum which preceded the signing and promulgation, started with a group of gentlemen meeting in a Berlin palace in Germany at the invitation of Prince Otto von Bismarck and at the behest of the Belgian King Leopold II in the winter of 1884 and early spring of 1885. Simply put, the assignment of these gentlemen in Berlin was to cut up Africa into parcels, large and small, depending on the competing claims, and divide them among the competing powers represented at the Berlin Conference. The gentlemen who huddled together over maps and charts and sketches in Berlin that winter knew precious little about the piece of geography they were brooding over and that they intended to divide up among themselves. The African hinterland, according to contemporary accounts, was probably as mysterious to this gentleman as was the moon. But building on the scant knowledge provided by cartographers and stories related by the few daring-do travelers who had hazarded a few sorties to this hinterland, which was still, for many people, still considered as some kind of terra nulla. They contrived to carve up this continent into individual freeholds to be held by the competing powers represented at Berlin. There was neither a firm understanding of the human groups that inhabited these vast tracts of land, nor a care as to what they may think about this parceling out of their territories, that is to say, the people who inhabited these lands. These lands might as well have been empty wastelands waiting for people to settle them. King Leopold II was motivated by the personal fortunes that he saw come his way and was anxious to get as many accomplices as he could to join him in his ostensible endeavor to halt the slave trade, as he claimed. The search for scientific knowledge, the missionary zeal to proselytize and convert native populations to Christianity, the profit motive that drove a number of adventurers and sundry buccaneers to come to Africa were all rolled into one momentous enterprise that eventually served imperial ambitions. Little else mattered, and least of all were the concerns of the peoples over which these lines and sketches were being drawn in Berlin, and whose lands were being chopped up, sliced, and brought together again in incongruous new formations that had little to do with ethnographic realities or political, social, cultural realities of the African peoples. As a result of the Berlin Conference, and during the frenetic activities of the imperial powers in contention in the so-called scramble for Africa, a number of things happened whose import remains with us today. Scholars of great stature have expounded greatly on many of these, and all I'm doing here is try to comprehend them in a way that explains our problems in the present. I believe that one of the most important things that happened at the time was that we became chattels, property items belonging to someone or something external to ourselves. Africans had already been made chattels before, during the slave trade, which was even in this period under consideration being practiced. Yet this was the first time that whole regions of our continent, with all their peoples, land, flora and fauna, and most importantly their souls, were converted into someone else's property. With that, Africa lost its humanity, was shorn of its Africanness, and robbed of its very self-worth. We all know what happened after that. We were taught, and we came to believe, that we were an inferior race, that we had no culture, and no cultural references to turn to, except the white man's culture. That our traditions and cultural expressions were satanic and had to be abandoned. Even our names, which expressed our affinity with our environment and cosmology, were negated. We were created anew by the white man. Only he attributed that job to his God, who had supplanted our gods. It's next to impossible to describe sufficiently accurately what happened to us in that whole period, when we were fashioned as shadows of the white man and his colonial machine took over all our lives, materially, psychologically, and spiritually. Words have not been invented to describe or convey the full extent of the damage that was done then to the psyche of the African human being. I remember that when I went into Africa as a young man and met fellow young Africans from certain countries on the continent, I heard and was shocked for the first time people who could refer to, I quote, "my savage mother," end quote, referring to a real mother. And I was hard-pressed to divine whether this would have come only from the fact that in the elementary schools they were taught to sing, "Our ancestors were Golwa, nos ancêtres étaient Golwa." It is this servility of a broken spirit that made grown men, not only the laughable but tragic Jean Bedel Bokassa of Central African Republic / Empire, but also even serious men like Leopold Sedar Senghor and Felix Houphouët-Boigny, to refer to Charles de Gaulle as our loving father, and they themselves as his adoring children. These, of course, were the more egregious expressions of the singular colonial experience, that of the French colonies. But it was no less real in the British colonies as well, where the same levels of acculturation happened even if the British may have been too racist to contemplate any brotherly bonds between themselves and their possessions. But the patronizing attitudes were in full evidence, and the disdain with which they viewed our cultures was unmistakable. Because the imperial powers already controlled our minds, other levels of control came easily. Of course, our governance cultures, institutions, and processes were done away with. Our traditional ways of choosing our rulers and the governance institutions that made our rulers answerable to their peoples were destroyed. The accounts of white visitors who, like Henry Morton Stanley in Uganda, stumbled onto magnificent empires that could be compared to some in Europe in terms of hierarchical organization and governance processes. Even candid racists like Stanley could not help but marvel at the magnificence of an empire like the Buganda Empire. But in short order, such established and still developing systems were thwarted, stopped in their tracks, destroyed, and forgotten for the most part. This happened in many places in Africa, where imperial adventures took care to destroy whatever evidence of maturity of governance structures and institutions, because these were logically incompatible with the colonial project. So they destroyed them, and in their place installed institutions whose sole purpose was to advance the interests of the colonial project. At independence, this point was never revisited. There was hardly any nationalist movement, however radical, that dared to think of undoing the damage that had been caused by the colonial administrations by proposing and even a creative return to what had been taken away from us, taking up the pieces where they fell not so long ago, and refashioning them into a vehicle that would unite us with ourselves, while embracing whatever of value we had acquired during the forced march of colonization. All the accounts available to us regarding the negotiations that led to the independence of our respective countries point to a general agreement to have new entities recognized as independent states within a framework that did not radically change the nature of relations existing between the departing colonial power and the new elites poised to take their places. Marlborough House, or Lancaster